Have you ever caught your reflection in a window and felt like you were looking at a stranger? Not because you didn't recognize your face, but because you didn't recognize the person behind it. Maybe you just snapped at someone you love, or perhaps you stayed silent when you should have spoken up. You find yourself wondering, why am I like this? Why do I keep reacting this way? It feels like there's an invisible hand steering your life, making choices before you even realize it. We call this personality, but most of us treat it like a weather pattern, something that just happens to us. We say things like, I'm just not a social person, or I've always been a worrier. But there is a profound difference between who you are and the stories you've been told about yourself. Understanding that difference is the first step toward actually owning your life. Because if you don't understand the machinery of your personality, you'll always be a passenger in your own skin. In psychology, we don't define personality by your favorite color or your vibe. We define it as an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. Think of it as your psychological thumbprint. It's unique, and it's remarkably stable. If you are highly organized today, statistics show you likely will be 10 years from now. This stability is what psychologists call trait consistency across different situations. It's the reason your best friend can predict exactly how you'll react to a bad breakup. They aren't psychic. They've simply mapped out the invisible core of your behavioral tendencies. This core acts as a filter through which you process every single piece of information. Two people see the same barking dog. One sees a threat, the other sees a friend. The dog didn't change, but the trait-level sensitivity to threat, or neuroticism, did. Personality isn't just what you do, it's the default setting of your internal software. It determines your baseline, the place your mind returns to when you aren't trying to be anyone else. I want you to imagine two brothers, Elias and Julian, born just 2 years apart. They grew up in the same drafty house, ate the same meals, and survived the same volatile father. From the outside, their input was identical. The same DNA, the same environment, the same trauma. But by age 25, Elias had become a high-stakes trial lawyer who thrived on confrontation. He was loud, assertive, and seemed to recharge his batteries by being in the center of a crowd. Julian, on the other hand, became a freelance illustrator who worked in almost total silence. He was soft-spoken, deeply sensitive to criticism, and felt drained after just an hour of small talk. If you ask them why they are the way they are, they'd both point to their childhood. Elias would say, I had to be loud to be heard in that house. It made me a fighter. Julian would say, the house was so chaotic that I learned to disappear into my own head. Same environment, two completely different survival strategies. Two completely different souls. It makes you wonder, is your personality a shield you built? Or was it forged before you were born? For decades, psychologists and biologists have been locked in a heated debate. Is personality something you're born with, or is it something the world does to you? Modern behavioral genetics has finally given us a surprisingly consistent answer. Based on massive studies of identical twins raised apart, the split is roughly 50-50. About 50% of the variance in our personality traits is attributed to our genetic makeup. This means you inherit a range for things like extroversion or emotional stability. Think of your DNA as the thermostat setting for your psychological reactions. If your anxiety thermostat is set high at birth, you'll naturally feel more stress. But the other 50% comes from your non-shared environment, your unique life experiences. This isn't just your parents, it's the friends you had, the books you read, and the risks you took. Your genes provide the sketch, but your environment provides the colors and the shading. You might be born with a predisposition for curiosity, but your culture decides what you explore. It's a constant dance between your biological hardware and your environmental software. You aren't a blank slate at birth, but you're not a finished book either. If you've ever taken a personality test online, it probably gave you a type. You're an architect, a mediator, or a four-letter code, like INTJ. But in academic psychology, we don't use boxes, we use spectrums. The gold standard is the Big Five model, often remembered by the acronym OCEAN. First is openness, your hunger for new experiences and abstract ideas. Next is conscientiousness, your level of self-discipline and orderliness. Then, extroversion, where you draw your energy, from people or from solitude. Agreeableness measures how much you prioritize social harmony over your own interests. Finally, neuroticism is your sensitivity to negative emotion and perceived threats. Instead of being type A or type B, you're simply high or low on these 5 scales. This is why two extroverts can look completely different in a social setting. One might be high in agreeableness, the friendly host, the other low, the loud debater. These 5 traits are universal. They show up in every culture across the globe. They're the Big Five because they account for almost all human behavioral variation. When you map these, you aren't looking at a label, you're looking at your default settings. Think about the last time you were at a high-pressure job interview or a first date. You probably weren't lounging back, cracking crude jokes, or showing your moody side. You were likely polite, attentive, and perhaps a bit more enthusiastic than usual. In psychology, we call this social desirability, or self-monitoring. It's the mask we put on to navigate the complex social waters of being human. Sometimes we wear this mask so often that we forget what's underneath it. We start to confuse our social performance with our actual personality. You might be a natural introvert who has learned to perform extroversion for work, but at the end of the day, when you close your front door, the mask slips off. You feel a profound sense of exhaustion, not from the work, but from the acting. This friction between who you are and who you pretend to be is where burnout lives. The goal isn't to never wear a mask, it's to know exactly when you're wearing one. For a long time, psychologists believed that personality was set in plaster by age 30. The idea was that once you reached adulthood, your traits were essentially locked in. But modern research into personality plasticity has turned that theory on its head. While our core DNA remains the same, our traits actually shift as we navigate life. This is known as the maturity principle. As people age, they generally change. Most people become more agreeable, more conscientious, and less neurotic over time. We call this psychological seasoning, learning to regulate emotions and fulfill roles. However, there is a cognitive bias called the end of history illusion. We are good at recognizing how much we've changed in the past 10 years, but we are terrible at predicting how much we will change in the next 10. We mistakenly believe that the version of us that exists today is the final version. In reality, your personality is a work in progress until the day you die. Significant life events, like a career change or a loss, can nudge your traits. You aren't a finished statue, you're a living, breathing, adaptive system. We all have parts of our personality that we'd rather keep in the basement. Maybe it's a quick temper, a tendency to procrastinate, or a paralyzing fear of rejection. In psychology, we often call this the shadow, the traits that don't fit our ideal self-image. It's easy to love the parts of yourself that are high in conscientiousness at work. It's much harder to sit with the high neuroticism that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. You might look at someone else's easygoing nature and feel a deep sense of envy. You think, if only I were more like them, my life would finally make sense. but trying to cut out a piece of your personality is like trying to cut out your own shadow. The more you push it away, the more it dictates your behavior from the darkness. True psychological maturity isn't about fixing your traits until they are perfect. It's about integration, learning to shake hands with the parts of you that scare you. When you stop fighting your nature, you finally have the energy to actually lead it. Most people think personality is just a list of traits, like a grocery list of behaviors. But psychologist Dan McAdams argues that personality actually exists on three distinct levels. Level 1 is the big 5 traits we've already discussed, your biological broad strokes. Level 2 is personal concerns, your specific goals, defenses, and values at this stage of life. But the third level is the most fascinating. It's your narrative identity. This is the internal story you write about your life to give it meaning and purpose. You aren't just a person who is high in openness, you are a seeker or an explorer. You don't just have high neuroticism, you might see yourself as a survivor of past anxiety. While your traits, level 1, are relatively stable, your story, level 3, is incredibly flexible. Two people can have the exact same low agreeableness trait from a genetic standpoint. One tells a story of being a hard-nosed truth teller, while the other sees a lonely misfit. The story you choose to tell determines how you deploy your traits in the real world. Your traits are the bricks, but your narrative identity is the architecture of the building. You can't always change the bricks you were given, but you can always redesign the house. So, who are you really? Are you the genetic code you inherited before you took your first breath? Are you the collection of habits you've built to survive your childhood? Or are you the person you pretend to be when the world is watching? The truth is, you are the space where all of those things meet. You are a constant traveler, moving through a landscape of your own making. Your personality isn't a prison cell, it's a compass. It tells you which way you naturally lean, but it doesn't tell you where to walk. Once you stop trying to be someone else, you finally have the maps to be yourself. You can look at your traits, even the difficult ones, with a sense of quiet curiosity. You are the author of the story, even if you didn't choose the ink. And that story is still being written, one conscious choice at a time.